David stared at his coffee cup, watching the steam rise into the cold morning air. The same ceramic mug he'd used for 3 years. The same instant coffee. The same small kitchen table by the window that looked out at the parking lot of his apartment. Complex, everything was exactly the same as yesterday, and the day before that, and probably tomorrow too. He glanced at his phone. 7:15 in the morning. Time to get ready for work, again. The shower water took forever to warm up, just like always. He brushed his teeth while looking at himself in the bathroom mirror. 34 years old, brown hair getting thinner. On top, tired eyes that seemed older than they should be. When did he start looking so worn out? His ex-wife Lisa used to say he looked tired all the time. She said a lot of things before she left 6 months ago. Things like how he never wanted to try anything new, how he was afraid to take chances, how being with him felt like being stuck in the same day over and over again. Maybe she was right. David put on his work clothes. The same gray pants, the same blue shirt, the same black shoes. He grabbed his laptop bag and car keys. Another day at TechFlow Solutions awaited him. Another 8 hours of staring at computer screens and analyzing data that nobody really cared about. The drive to work was 23 minutes through the same streets he'd driven for 2 years. Past the gas station where he sometimes bought energy drinks. Past the billboard advertising a vacation resort in Hawaii that he'd never visit. Past the construction site that had been under construction for so long he couldn't remember what they were building. At work, his cubicle sat in the middle of a sea of other cubicles. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the constant hum of air conditioning and keyboard clicking. His desk had a computer, a phone that rarely rang, and a small plant his sister had given him last Christmas. The plant was dying slowly, despite his efforts to keep it alive. "Morning, David," said Tom from the next cubicle over him. Tom was 50-something, had worked there for 15 years, and brought the same turkey sandwich for lunch every single day. "Morning," David replied, settling into his chair. He opened his computer and started working on the Peterson account. Numbers and charts and graphs that showed how well or poorly some company was doing. It was important work, supposedly. It helped businesses make decisions. But sitting there, clicking through spreadsheets, David couldn't shake the feeling that none of it really mattered. Around lunchtime, something unusual happened. David was reviewing satellite data for a client when he noticed something strange. In the images taken over the past 3 weeks, there were patterns that didn't make sense. Geometric shapes in remote locations that appeared and disappeared. Formations that looked almost artificial. He enlarged the images on his screen. The shapes were definitely there. Perfect circles and straight lines in places where there shouldn't be perfect circles and straight lines. In the middle of forests and deserts, far from any cities or roads. "Hey, Mr. Rodriguez." David called to his supervisor. "Can you take a look at this?" Mr. Rodriguez walked over, adjusting his glasses. He looked at David's screen for about 30 seconds. "Equipment error," he said without much interest. "Happens all the time with satellite imagery. Just mark it in your report and move on." "But look at the patterns," David said. "There's a regular to be random errors. David, we have deadlines to meet. Don't waste time chasing glitches in the system." Mr. Rodriguez walked away, leaving David staring at the screen. The patterns were still there, clear as day, but apparently nobody wanted to hear about them. He saved the images to his personal folder anyway. The rest of the workday crawled by. At 5:30, David packed up his things and drove home. He stopped at the grocery store and bought a frozen dinner and a can of soda, the same brand he always bought. At the checkout, the cashier didn't make eye contact, just scanned his items and told him the total. Back in his apartment, David heated up his dinner and sat at the kitchen table. He tried watching television, but couldn't focus on any of the shows. Everything seemed loud and pointless. He kept thinking about those satellite images, about the strange patterns that his boss dismissed so quickly. He also kept thinking about the dream he'd been having lately, the same dream, night after night for the past 2 weeks. In the dream, he was standing on top of a mountain. looking out at a landscape that didn't look like anywhere on Earth. The sky was a different color. There were two moons, and someone was standing beside him, someone he couldn't quite see, telling him that this was where he belonged. The dreams felt more real than his actual life sometimes. After dinner, David decided to take a walk. He needed fresh air, needed to get out of the apartment that suddenly felt too small. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. It was actually beautiful, though he rarely took time to notice things like that anymore. He walked through his neighborhood, past houses where families were probably having dinner together, past apartment buildings full of people living their own repetitive lives. Everyone seemed to be going through the motions, just like him. At the corner store, he bought a bottle of water. The elderly man behind the counter smiled and asked how his day was. Same as always, David said automatically. The old man nodded knowingly. Sometimes same is good, but sometimes. He paused, looking at David with curious eyes. Sometimes a person needs something different to happen. David wasn't sure what to say to that. He thanked the man and left, walking back to his apartment as darkness fell. David found himself wondering when his life had become so predictable. When had he stopped hoping for something exciting to happen? When had he started accepting that every day would be exactly like the last one? Lisa used to talk about traveling, about learning new languages and trying exotic foods and meeting interesting people. She had dreams and plans and energy, but slowly, over the years they were together, David had convinced her to be more practical, to save money instead of spending it on adventures, to stay home instead of exploring. Looking back now, he realized he'd been afraid of the unknown, afraid of taking risks, afraid of failing at something new. And now he was alone, living the safe, predictable life he'd chosen, the life that had driven away the one person who tried to bring some excitement into his world. As he reached his apartment building, David looked up at the darkening sky. Stars were starting to appear, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. Each one probably had planets around it. Maybe some of those planets had life. Maybe somewhere out there, someone was looking up at their sky and wondering if they were alone. David had never thought much about space before, but standing there in the parking lot, looking up at the stars, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He went inside, brushed his teeth, and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would be another day just like today. Same coffee, same drive to work, same cubicle, same everything. But as he lay in bed waiting for sleep, David found himself hoping for that dream again. The one with the strange landscape and the two moons and the feeling that he belonged somewhere else. Somewhere far away from this ordinary life that felt like it was slowly crushing his spirit. He closed his eyes and let the familiar darkness take him, carrying him away from the gray reality of his waking hours into whatever waited for him in the world of dreams. 3 days had passed since David first noticed the strange patterns in those satellite images. 3 days of thinking about them during his lunch breaks. 3 days of Mr. Rodriguez ignoring his questions. 3 days of feeling like he was going crazy for caring about something his boss called a computer glitch. Thursday evening started like any other. David heated up another frozen dinner and tried to watch the news. The weather report promised thunderstorms overnight. Outside his window, he could see dark clouds gathering in the distance, moving slowly toward the city. By 9 o'clock, the first drops of rain were hitting his window. By 10, it had turned into a steady downpour. David usually went to bed around 10:30, but tonight he felt restless. The sound of rain against the glass made him think of those dreams again, the ones with the strange landscapes and the feeling that someone was trying to tell him something important. He decided to make some tea and maybe read for a while, but as he walked to his kitchen, all the lights in his apartment suddenly went out. The power was gone, complete darkness. David felt around for his phone and used its flashlight to navigate to the window. Looking outside, he could see that the entire apartment complex was dark. The street lights were out too. Even the traffic lights at the nearby intersection had gone black. The storm had knocked out power to the whole neighborhood. He found some candles in his kitchen drawer and lit The flickering light made everything in his apartment look different. Shadows danced on the walls. The familiar rooms suddenly felt mysterious and unfamiliar. After about 30 minutes, David heard something unusual. Footsteps in the hallway. Outside his apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed to pause right outside his door. Then nothing. David waited, listening carefully. The rain continued to pound against his windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance. But no more footsteps. Curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed his phone for light and quietly opened his apartment door. The hallway was empty and dark. Emergency lighting should have kicked in, but apparently the backup system was down too. David stepped out and looked around. All his neighbors. Doors were closed. No one else seemed to be moving around. But then he saw something strange. At the far end of the hallway, near the stairwell, there was a faint light. Not electric light. Something softer, like moonlight. But there was no moon visible through the small hallway window. David walked toward the light, his footsteps echoing softly in the darkness. When he reached the stairwell, he realized the light was coming from outside, from the parking lot behind the building. He pushed open the fire door and stepped out into the rain. The water soaked through his shirt immediately, but David barely noticed. Standing in the middle of the parking lot was a woman. She wasn't running for cover like any normal person would during a storm like this. She wasn't even getting wet. Somehow, the rain seemed to fall around her instead of on her. And she was looking directly at him. "David," she called out. Her voice carried clearly over the sound of the storm. She knew his name, but David had never seen this woman before in his life. She was tall, maybe in her 30s, with long dark hair and clothes that looked expensive but unusual. Her jacket was some kind of material that seemed to shimmer even in the darkness. When lightning flashed across the sky, her eyes reflected the light in a way that didn't look quite human. "How do you know my name?" David called back, having to raise his voice over the rain. Instead of answering, she walked toward him. As she got closer, David could see that she wasn't wet at all. Not a single drop of rain had touched her. "You've been dreaming about mountains and strange skies," she said when she was close enough to speak normally. "You've been seeing 2 moons. In your sleep." David's heart started beating faster. He had never told anyone about those dreams. Not even Lisa when they were married. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who's been watching you," she replied. "Someone who knows you're tired of your small life." Another flash of lightning illuminated the parking lot for a brief moment. In that light, David could see her face clearly. She was beautiful, but in a way that seemed almost unreal. Her features were too perfect, too symmetrical. "You work at Touchflow Solutions," she continued. "Cubicle for 7B. You drive a blue Honda Civic that needs new tires. You eat the same breakfast every morning and watch the same television shows every night. How could you possibly know all that?" She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that made David feel like she could see right through him. "I know you found something unusual in those satellite images," she said. "I know. Your supervisor dismissed what you discovered. I know you saved those files to your personal folder." David took a step back. This was impossible. No one knew about the satellite images except him and Mr. Rodriguez. "I know you feel like you're wasting your life," she continued. "Like every day is the same meaningless routine. Like you're slowly disappearing into a gray, ordinary existence that doesn't matter to anyone." The rain continued to fall around them, but somehow David could hear every word she spoke clearly. "I know you dream of being somewhere else, somewhere important, somewhere you could make a real difference." She was right about everything, but knowing these things about his private thoughts, his dreams, his work, it should have been impossible. "What do you want?" David managed to ask. The woman looked up at the storm clouds, then back at him. When lightning flashed again, her eyes seemed to glow with their own light. "I want to offer you something your current life never could," she said. "Purpose, adventure, the chance to see things that would amaze you. The opportunity to be part of something much bigger than analyzing data in a gray cubicle." She took another step closer. David could smell something unusual. Not perfume, exactly, but something that reminded him of ozone after lightning strikes. "You don't have to live this repetitive, meaningless life," she said. "There are other possibilities, other worlds where your potential could be recognized and valued." Then, to David's complete shock, she knelt down in the rain-soaked parking lot, right there on the wet asphalt. She knelt before him like he was someone important, someone worth kneeling to. Looking up at him with those strange, too bright eyes. She whispered words that would change everything. "I can give you more than they ever will." Thunder crashed overhead at that exact moment, so loud it seemed to shake the ground. Lightning lit up the entire parking lot like daylight for one brilliant second. And in that second of bright light, the woman vanished. David stood there alone in the rain, blinking rapidly, wondering if he had imagined the entire encounter. But his shirt was soaked through now, and he could still smell that strange ozone scent in the air. He ran back to the apartment building, his heart pounding inside. He climbed the stairs to his floor, fumbling with his keys to get back into his apartment. The candles were still burning where he'd left them. Everything looked normal, ordinary, like nothing had happened. But David knew something had changed. Someone had found him, someone who knew things about him that should have been impossible to know, someone who had made him an offer he couldn't stop thinking about. He blew out the candles and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the storm gradually moved away. Sleep didn't come for hours, and when it finally did, he dreamed again of mountains and strange skies and the feeling that somewhere out there, someone was waiting for his answer. David barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the woman's face. Those strange, bright eyes. The way the rain fell around her instead of on her. The impossible thing she knew about his life. By morning, he had almost convinced himself it was just a weird dream brought on by the storm and the power outage. But when he went to make his usual coffee, he found something that made his hands shake. On his kitchen table was a small piece of paper that hadn't been there the night before. Written in elegant handwriting were the words, "Check your email. David, you'll find something interesting." He hadn't left any doors or windows unlocked. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. No one could have gotten inside. But there the note was, sitting next to his coffee mug like it had always been there. David grabbed his laptop and opened his email. Among the usual spam and work messages was something new, an email from an address he didn't recognize, distance.traveler.20to4@gmail.com. The subject line simply said, "For your consideration." His finger hovered over the message for almost a minute before he clicked it open. Inside was a single line of text, "Buy shares of Quantum Dynamics Corporation today. Trust me on this one." David stared at the screen. He'd never heard of Quantum Dynamics Corporation. He looked it up and found a small tech company that had been struggling for months. Their stock was trading at just under $3 per share. Nothing special about them at all. But something made him keep thinking about that email all day at work. During his lunch break, he decided to check the stock market. Quantum Dynamics had jumped to $8 per share in just a few hours. Some breakthrough announcement about new technology. If he had bought $1,000 worth of stock that morning, he would have made over $1,500 profit by lunchtime. David sat in his cubicle, staring at his computer screen. In disbelief, it could have been a coincidence, maybe, but the timing was perfect. That evening, as he was walking to his car in the office parking garage, he saw her again. She was leaning against a concrete pillar about 20 feet away, wearing the same unusual clothes from the night before. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage, she looked even more out of place, too elegant, too perfect. "Hello, David," she said calmly. This time he wasn't as shocked. He'd been half expecting to see her again. "You sent me that email," he said. "It wasn't a question. I told you I could give you more than they ever will." She gestured toward the office building behind him. "Your boss doesn't listen to your discoveries. Your colleagues don't appreciate your intelligence. But I do." She pushed herself away from the pillar and walked toward him. Her footsteps echoed strangely in the empty garage. "How did you know about that stock?" David asked. "I know many things," she replied. "I know that tomorrow, your company will announce they're laying off 15 people. Your friend Tom in the next cubicle will be one of them." David felt a chill run down his spine. Tom had worked there for 15 years. He had a family, kids in college. "I also know that next week there will be an earthquake in California. Not a big one, but it will damage 3 specific buildings in Los Angeles. Buildings owned by a company called Pacific Properties, Inc." She stopped walking when she was close enough that David could smell that strange ozone scent again. If someone were to buy insurance policies on those buildings before the earthquake, she continued, they could make a considerable amount of money. "You're talking about insurance fraud," David said, though his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm talking about knowledge," she corrected. "Knowledge that could change your life. Knowledge that could give you the resources to escape that gray little existence upstairs." She pointed toward the office building again. David looked up at the windows where he knew his cubicle was, where he spent 8 hours every day staring at computer screens and analyzing data that nobody cared about. "Why me?" he asked. "Why are you telling me these things?" "Because you're ready," she said simply. "Because you've been dreaming of something more. Because deep down, you know you don't belong in that world of schedules and spreadsheets and small conversations about the weather over the next 2 weeks. The woman appeared in David's life with increasing frequency. She was waiting by the coffee shop when he stopped for his morning drink. She was sitting in the library when he went there on Saturday afternoon. She was in the grocery store, standing in the produce section, examining apples like she was conducting some kind of scientific experiment. Each time, she shared another piece of impossible knowledge. She told him which restaurants to avoid because of food safety violations that wouldn't be discovered for another month. She warned him about a water main break that would flood his street. The following Tuesday, she gave him lottery numbers that won smaller prizes, never huge amounts, but enough to keep him interested, and every prediction came true. David started keeping a notebook, writing down everything she told him. The patterns were too consistent to be coincidence, too specific to be lucky guesses. But the strangest part wasn't the predictions. It was how she made him feel when she talked about the future. "There are places beyond this world," she told him one evening as they sat on a bench in the city park. "Places where beings like you and me are valued for our minds, not trapped by the limitations of ordinary human society." "Beings like you and me?" David asked. "You think you're just a regular person," she said, looking at him with those unnaturally bright eyes. "But regular people don't see the patterns you saw in those satellite images. Regular people don't dream of other worlds night after night. Regular people don't feel like strangers in their own lives." She reached over and touched his hand. Her skin was cold, but not unpleasantly so. It felt like touching smooth stone that had been left in the shade. "There's a reason you feel different, David, a reason you never quite fit in anywhere. You're not meant for the small world of office jobs and television shows and weekend trips to the mall." David found himself looking forward to these encounters more than anything else in his life. The woman, who still hadn't told him her name, understood him in ways that Lisa never had, ways that his co-workers never would. She talked about civilizations among the stars, about technologies that could reshape reality itself, about communities of advanced beings who spent their time exploring the deepest mysteries of existence, instead of worrying about mortgage payments and car repairs. "I could show you these places," she said during their most recent meeting. "I could introduce you to minds that would appreciate your intelligence. I could give you purpose beyond anything you've ever imagined." David's ordinary life began to feel more and more like a prison. His cubicle at work seemed smaller every day. Conversations with his co-workers felt meaningless. Even his apartment started to feel like a cage keeping him trapped in a world where he didn't belong. He stopped calling his sister back when she left voicemails. He avoided making plans with the few friends he had. He spent his evenings walking around the city, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious woman who had promised to change everything. And every night, his dreams grew more vivid. Mountains under alien skies. Cities built from materials that didn't exist on Earth. Beings who welcomed him like they'd been waiting for him all his life. The line between his dreams and his waking hours began to blur. Reality started to feel like the dream, and the dreams started to feel like the only thing that mattered. David knew he was losing himself in these fantasies, but for the first time in years, he felt alive. He felt like his life had meaning, like someone finally saw his true potential, and that feeling was so intoxicating that he didn't want it to stop. The message came on a Friday evening, written on the same elegant paper David had found on his kitchen table weeks ago. This time, it was slipped under his apartment door while he was at work. Tomorrow night, the old observatory on Mill Creek Road. It's time for you to see the truth. Come alone. David stared at the note for a long time. He knew about the observatory. It had been abandoned for years. After the city built a newer facility downtown, the place had been sitting empty on the hill outside town, slowly falling apart. But why there? Why now? All week, the woman had seemed different during their meetings, more urgent, more insistent about the opportunities she was offering him. She'd started talking about deadlines and windows of opportunity that wouldn't stay open forever. There are others watching you now, she had told him just 2 days earlier. Others who recognize your potential, but their patience isn't infinite. Saturday seemed to last forever. David tried to focus on normal weekend activities, grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning his apartment, but his mind kept drifting to that note, to whatever was waiting for him at the observatory. As the sun began to set, David found himself driving up the winding road toward Mill Creek. The observatory sat on top of a hill overlooking the city below. In the growing darkness, he could see the lights of his neighborhood spread out like a carpet of tiny stars. His old life looked so small from up here. The observatory building was larger than he'd expected. White concrete walls, a dome-shaped roof, and several smaller structures connected by covered walkways. Most of the windows were boarded up, but David could see a faint light coming from somewhere. Inside the main building, he parked his car and walked toward the entrance. The door, which should have been locked, opened easily when he pushed on it. Inside, emergency lighting cast long shadows down empty hallways. David followed the light deeper into the building, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The place smelled like dust and abandonment. He found her in the main observation room, standing beneath the huge dome that had once housed the telescope. The dome was open to the night sky, and starlight filtered down onto her face. She was wearing different clothes tonight, something that looked almost like a uniform. Dark blue with silver details that seemed to shimmer when she moved. "You came," she said, turning to face him. "I wasn't certain you would." "Why here?" David asked, looking around at the empty room. "Because this is a place built for looking at distant worlds," she replied. It seemed appropriate. She walked over to a control panel that still had power somehow. When she pressed a few buttons, holographic images appeared in the air above them. Images that looked like the satellite photos David had found at work, but much clearer and more detailed. "These are the patterns you discovered," she said. "The ones your supervisor dismissed as equipment errors." David stared at the floating images. The geometric shapes were even more obvious now. Perfect circles, straight lines, complex patterns that definitely weren't natural formations. "They're landing sites," the woman continued. "Places where my people have been conducting research on your world." "Your people?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "We've been studying Earth for decades," she explained. "Learning about human civilization, identifying individuals with the potential to join us in exploring the universe." She waved her hand, and the holographic images changed. Now they showed places David had never seen before. Cities of crystalline structures reaching into colorful skies. Beings that looked almost human but moved with an otherworldly grace. Technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics. "This is what I've been trying to show you," she said. "The life you could have, the purpose you could serve, the community where your mind would be valued and challenged." David felt overwhelmed. The images were beautiful, but they were also terrifying. Everything he thought he knew about the world, about reality itself, was crumbling around him. "Others have made this choice before you," the woman continued. She touched the control panel again, and new images appeared. People who looked ordinary, human, but who were now wearing the same kind of uniform she wore. They were smiling, working alongside the otherworldly beings, exploring fantastic landscapes. "These were people like you," she said, "people who felt trapped in small lies, people who dreamed of something more." One of the faces looked familiar. David stared at it for a moment before he realized where he'd seen it before. It was a missing person poster he'd seen at the post office months ago. A young man who had disappeared without a trace. "Where are they?" David asked. "These people who joined you. They're exploring the galaxy." She replied, "Learning things your Earth scientists won't discover for centuries. Living lives of purpose and discovery." She stepped closer to him, and David could see his reflection in her strange, bright eyes. "But the opportunity won't last forever," she said. "My people are preparing to leave this solar system. We've learned what we came here to learn. In 48 hours, we'll begin our journey to the next world we plan to study." David felt his heart racing. 48 hours. 2 days to decide whether to abandon everything he'd ever known. "If you come with us," she continued, "you'll never see Earth again. Never return to your old life. But you'll be part of something magnificent. Something that will expand your understanding of existence itself." She reached into her uniform and pulled out a small device that looked like a combination of metal and crystal. It glowed with a soft blue light. "This is a communication device," she explained. "If you decide to join us, activate it tomorrow night at exactly midnight. We'll come for you." David took the device. It was warm to the touch and seemed to vibrate slightly in his palm. "What if I say no?" he asked. For the first time since he met her, the woman's expression became sad. "Then you'll return to your cubicle on Monday morning," she said. "You'll analyze data that doesn't matter. You'll eat the same breakfast and drive the same route to work, and slowly disappear into the gray routine that was suffocating you before. I found you." She paused, looking out through the open dome at the stars above. "And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been." David left the observatory with the device in his pocket and questions swirling in his mind. The drive back to his apartment passed in a blur. Everything looked different now. The houses, the streets, the people, it all seemed temporary and insignificant compared to what he'd just been offered. Back in his apartment, David sat at his kitchen table and stared at the glowing device. 48 hours to choose between the safe, predictable life he'd always known and an adventure beyond anything he'd ever imagined. But as the hours passed and morning approached, doubts began to creep in. The woman's story was incredible, but was it true? The holographic images could have been faked. The missing people in the photos, there could be other explanations for their disappearances. And if it was real, if she really was offering him a chance to explore the galaxy, what was the catch? Why would advanced beings from another world want someone like him? What weren't they telling him? David spent most of Sunday walking around the city, looking at his life from this new perspective. Every familiar place seemed like it might be the last time he'd see it. Every conversation with strangers at coffee shops or in the park might be his final interactions with other human beings. The weight of the choice was crushing. Stay and accept a life of quiet desperation, or leave everything behind for promises that might not be real. As Sunday evening approached, David realized he still didn't know what he was going to do. The device in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Midnight was only a few hours away, and he still had no idea which choice would save him and which would destroy him. David couldn't eat dinner Sunday night. The glowing device sat on his kitchen table like a time bomb, counting down to the most important decision of his life. Every few minutes, he picked it up, turned it over in his hands, then set it back. Down. 11:30 p.m. 30 minutes left to decide. His laptop was open beside the device, showing search results he'd been reading for hours. Missing persons reports from the past 5 years. Men and women who had vanished without explanation, leaving behind jobs, families, entire lives. The faces in the holographic images at the observatory, David was now certain. He'd seen at least 3 of them on missing person websites. People who had simply disappeared one day, never to be heard from again. Was that really what joining the woman's people meant? Becoming another face on a missing person poster. David's phone rang, startling him so badly he nearly knocked over his coffee cup. The caller ID showed his sister and his number. "Hey, David," her voice sounded tired. "I know it's late, but I wanted to check on you. You haven't returned my calls in weeks." David stared at the phone. Anna lived 3 hours away with her husband. And to kids, she called every Sunday, usually while making dinner for the family. He'd been ignoring those calls for almost a month now. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been dealing with some stuff." "What kind of stuff? You sound different." Everyone in his life had been saying that lately. Tom at work had asked if he was feeling okay. The cashier at his regular coffee shop had commented that he seemed distracted. Even his neighbor had mentioned that David looked like he had something on his mind. "Anna," David said slowly, "do you remember when we were kids and I used to talk about wanting to be an astronaut?" She laughed softly. "Of course, you were obsessed with space. Mom used to find you on the roof with Dad's binoculars, trying to see planets. What happened to that dream?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Life happened, I guess," Anna said. "You grew up. You realized being an astronaut was incredibly difficult and dangerous, and that maybe there were more practical ways to use your intelligence. But what if I had tried? What if I had really pushed for it?" "David, is this about your job? Because you know you could always look for something different. You're smart enough to do anything you want." The device on the table pulsed brighter for a moment. David looked at the clock on his laptop. 11:45. "Anna, I need to ask you something," he said. "If I disappeared tomorrow, would you miss me?" "What kind of question is that? Of course I miss you. You're my brother." "David, you're scaring me. Are you thinking about doing something dangerous?" David closed his eyes. In his mind, he could see the woman's face, those impossible, bright eyes, the promise of adventures among the stars, a life of purpose and discovery that would make his current existence look like a footnote, but he could also hear the concern in Anna's voice. Real worry for someone she loved. "I have to go," David said. "David." "Wait," he hung up and turned off the phone. 11:50-5. David picked up the device and walked to his window. Outside, the city stretched out below him. Thousands of lights and thousands of windows. Thousands of people living ordinary lives, dealing with ordinary problems, finding small moments of happiness in routine days. Was there really something wrong with being ordinary? The woman had made his life sound pathetic and meaningless. But looking out at all those lights, David began to wonder if maybe there was value in the simple human connections he'd been taking for granted, and his phone calls every Sunday, Tom's daily greetings at work, the elderly man at the corner store who always asked about his day, even Lisa, his ex-wife, who had cared enough to worry about his fear of taking risks. These weren't cosmic adventures or galaxy-spanning discoveries, but they were real. They were human. They were his. 11:58. David held the device up to the window. It was glowing brighter now, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. All he had to do was activate it, press the small button on the side, and wait for whatever came next. But as he stood there, something else occurred to him, something that made his blood run cold. In all their conversations, the woman had never actually told him her name. She knew everything about his life, but she'd shared almost nothing about herself. She talked about advanced civilizations and cosmic purposes, but she'd never explained why beings capable of traveling between stars would need someone like him. What if Anna was right to be worried? What if this wasn't about joining an advanced civilization at all? David thought about the missing people in the photos, the ones who had been promised something wonderful and then vanished forever. Had they really found new lives among the stars, or had they simply become victims of an elaborate scheme? 11:50-9. The device was pulsing rapidly now, almost vibrating in his hand. Through the window, David thought he could see lights in the sky that weren't stars, moving lights. Getting closer, his finger hovered over the activation button. But then he thought about Anna's voice on the phone, the genuine love and concern he'd heard there. He thought about Tom at work, who brought pictures of his grandchildren to show round the office. He thought about all the ordinary, imperfect, gloriously human people who made up his world. Maybe his life was small. Maybe it was routine and predictable and far from cosmic in its significance. But it was his life. It was real. And there were people in it who would miss him if he vanished at midnight. David opened his window and threw the device as hard as he could into the darkness outside. It hit the pavement in the parking lot and shattered into pieces that scattered and went dark. Above him, the moving lights in the sky stopped for a moment, hovering. Then they began to move away, growing smaller and smaller until they looked like ordinary stars again. David closed the window and sat down at his kitchen table. His hands were shaking, but he felt more awake and alive than he had in months. He turned his phone back on and called Anna. "David," she answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," he said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. "I was just thinking about some big changes, but I think I've decided to stay put for now." "Good," she said, relief clear in her voice. "Because I was about to drive over there and check on you myself." They talked for another hour. About her, kids, about David's job, about ordinary things that suddenly seemed precious and important. The next morning, David went to work as usual, but instead of just accepting Mr. Rodriguez's dismissal of the satellite patterns, he put together a detailed report and sent it to the company's research division. Instead of eating lunch alone, he asked Tom if he wanted to grab a sandwich together. Instead of counting down the hours until he could go home, David started looking for ways to make his work more meaningful. He volunteered for new projects. He suggested improvements to their data analysis methods. He began treating his colleagues like interesting people instead of obstacles to endure. It wasn't a cosmic adventure. It wasn't going to reshape the universe or unlock the secrets of existence. But it was real. It was human. It was his choice to make dot, and for the first time in years, David felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Sometimes, late at night, he still dreamed about mountains under alien skies. But when he woke up, instead of feeling disappointed by ordinary reality, he felt grateful to be home.